Let's talk about AWS Kinesis. Now, really, Kinesis is a collection of services. It's designed around processing streaming data of various types. And the data is processed in shards. Each shard is able to ingest 1,000 records per second. And the default limit to the number of shards you can have is 500, but you can request that limit be raised to whatever you think you might need. When a piece of data comes into Kinesis, it's called a record, and that record is going to consist of a partition key, a sequence number, and whatever the data is that you're sending in. And the data can be up to 1 megabyte in size. Kinesis should be thought of as a transient data store. Its default retention period is 24 hours, but it can be configured up to 7 days. But really, don't treat it like a persistent data store. It's just a way to gather in data at a very high rate of speed, and then you have to do something with that data, be it write it out to a database or S3 or process it through Lambda. So you should keep that in mind. Now, as I said, there's various flavors of Kinesis. One of the newer flavors is the ability to process video streams. And this is probably not going to show up on the exam, so we're not going to spend too much time talking about this particular option. We're going to focus more on the data stream, which allows us to ingest a high volume of data and then process it through a variety of ways. We also have Firehose that allows us to automatically send that data to a variety of landing spaces. So if we don't have to process it right then and there, we can land that data in some other system or service. A very interesting feature of Kinesis is we can actually do analytics on the data as it's coming in. So we don't necessarily have to wait until it gets landed in a data warehouse before we start looking at analytics on the data. As I said before, Kinesis processes things in shards, and you can think of shards as lanes in a highway. The more lanes in a highway, the more traffic can go through at one time. So the more shards you have, the more traffic can go through. So in this case, we have a certain number of shards. We have our data coming in. That data gets divided up into those shards. And then ultimately, it gets passed on to either Firehose, where it gets landed maybe in S3 or Redshift, or we can have applications called consumer applications that read these shards and pick up the data, and then they can process it. Something important to know about how Kinesis processes data is that each shard is given a partition key. Now, I've truncated the partition keys here, but really it's a 128-bit MD5 hash, and it's unique to each shard. Additionally, each piece of data as it comes into the shard gets assigned a sequence number, and these numbers are always increasing. So you can use the sequence number inside a given partition key to decide the newness relative to some other piece of data in that same shard. But notice, sequence numbers can be duplicated across shards. So to uniquely identify your data, you really have to use that partition key and that sequence number. Here's an architecture for a Maker Lab I did for A Cloud Guru not too long ago. It involves using the Twitter API to bring in tweets via Kinesis, and then using Firehose, we landed them on an S3 bucket. Once they hit the S3 bucket, we then triggered a Lambda routine which unpacked that tweet. We stored it in a DynamoDB database. We also did some text analysis to try to figure out whether that tweet was friendly or not so friendly. If you want a hands-on exercise for using Kinesis, I recommend going and checking out that Maker Lab.